there will be a lot of demand for oil. Shale oil, of course, will contribute, but the fact that heavy oil in terms of volume and the recovery percentages is still dominating, I think heavy oil presence will continue to exist, and production from heavy oil will continue to rise. That was also mentioned in Dr. Farouk Ali's presentation, and I agree with it. The price is a little bit a different story because, of course, the continuous reduction of the shale oil production price and operating cost will definitely cast a shadow on the continuous development of heavy oil. But I think the trick there is to really understand the journey that shale oil has taken to bring the prices down and apply as much of that learning as possible to the heavy oil development as well. And there are a few tricks that can be applied to heavy oil. We cannot take conventional development and cast it on a heavy oil development because it will not work. It's just completely different. You require different thinking, different mechanisms, and different marketing strategy. But I think heavy oil will continue to play a role, whether locally here in the Sultanate, and we've talked about some of the numbers, or internationally.
I also wanted to ask you about the state of the industry today as well, because when you look at the conversation on CNBC, for example, a lot of what we hear about now is about a possible global economic recession. There's warning signs flashing in the bond markets with the inversion of the yield curve. We look at the data out of Europe, for example, which seems to be slowing, and of course talk of this recession in the United States as well. Where do you think the demand is going to come from, not just for oil, but in particular for heavy oil? And should we be concerned about perhaps slowing demand?
There will probably be a period of slowing demand. It is happening as we speak, but it's driven by political situations that we all understand. I think the trick is when you look into oil and gas development, and particularly heavy oil and also shale, you don't take the very short-term view into consideration. You of course look at it, but your plans are very long term. Yeah, you're looking into 10, 15, 20 years, and in the case of heavy oil, probably longer. And therefore, allowing the short-term view to influence your decision making is going to be very risky. We've seen it a few years back when the demand was also going down, and there was a lot of slowness in the investment, that the fear was we will come to a point where the demand will start to pick up and the investment have not caught up with it. And I think the market was smart enough to continue investing, and particularly in Oman, we insisted that our development programs should not be affected at all by what's happening around us, and should always be ready to demonstrate that we can pick up the production when the market recovers. And that strategy and that thinking has not changed. And I think globally it's following pretty much the same sort of level of thinking. So what's happening today will of course have some implications, but I think for oil and gas development, heavy oil particularly, the view is very long term. And the long term is there will be a position for oil, despite the growth in renewable and of course gas. But oil will continue to have a place, and I have not seen a single forecast that shows oil really getting out of the equation. There is some forecast that shows oil in 10 years' time starting to, in terms of demand, to slow down, but these are very long-term forecasts and they change almost on a daily basis.
And just finally on indulgence, just on some of the market fundamentals, do you ever expect us to test something like 40 USD a barrel in the near term?
Well, I think Dr. Farouk Ali has a better telescope than myself. We don't get into the oil pricing discussion. I think our strategy has always been, and we've communicated this many times, we need to be ready for whatever the oil price is, whether it's 40 or 30 or 60 or 80. Our development strategy, our development projects need to withstand whatever oil price that the market throw at us. And at this stage, I think we are in a strong position to manage even the $40 if it comes. Nationally, of course, we need a much higher oil price, But from oil and gas development, if you just talk to the operators and to the oil industry in isolation, I think we can take it. We have no problem with that. I hope we don't get to the $40, but if we do, we will continue to operate.
So you're ready for it. Let's talk about that long and winding road. That was a great visual that we used just before. Tell me about the state of the heavy oil industry here in Oman, and what is the opportunity that it presents to a lot of the stakeholders here in the room?
So five producing fields have already been mentioned, of course, one operated by Occidental, Mukhajna, and 4 operated by PDO. Different recovery mechanism. Steam is by far the dominant. We have also gravity-assisted steam or steam-assisted gravity drainage in Qarn al-Alam. We have, of course, chemical injection polymer in Marmool operated by PDO. And so we have different recovery mechanism. We produce about, really, depending on the API that you take, anywhere between 15 to 30% of our production today comes from heavy oil, enhanced oil recovery mechanism. So it is a big chunk of our production today in Oman comes from heavy oil, and it continues to grow, of course. The last bid round that the Ministry of Oil and Gas launched had at least one block that is heavy oil. And we were quite surprised, actually. The interest in that particular block was very healthy. And we are currently finalizing the discussion with what we think is a potentially attractive development plan that we've seen. So that one is hopefully going to come, and as soon as we finish, we will announce it, of course, to the market. We're also looking into the infamous Habhab field here in Oman. And we've looked at it many times. PDO had a few attempts at producing the field. Finally, of course, it's back with the Ministry of Oil and Gas, and I was told that we could potentially have a development plan ready to be tested, agreed by the ministry before the end of this year, hopefully. So, and that is a 1 billion barrel oil in place, heavy oil, of course, ultra heavy oil. Probably it's probably 11, 12 APIs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so that's going to be very challenging. But these are all indications that the heavy oil appetite, whether it's locally or globally, is still there. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about the future of the industry as well. When you look at the maturity of the sector here in Oman, what do you think the government should be doing or needs to be doing in order to essentially make heavy oil more commercially viable for producers looking to do business in the country? And tell me about some of the initiatives that the government has already taken.
I think the trick in whether it's heavy oil or oil shales and low oil prices is localizing the industry. That's what we've seen in the US, is your ability to respond fast, not necessarily waiting for tools to be manufactured or offshored or air freighted. It's your ability to actually call your local supplier, your local contractor, your local expertise, and get a solution ready to be deployed very quickly. Your ability to take equipments out of service, service them, and fix them and put them back again very quickly. These are the tricks in many of these sort of developments. And that's where we are driving the in-country value program that all the operators are supporting, and fully supported by the Ministry of Oil and Gas, is actually driving that sort of thinking. Let's localize as much as possible the industry. That makes the response faster, that makes the operating cost hopefully lower, that makes the involvement of the operator with whatever solution that the service providers are bringing a little bit more, so ultimately lowering the cost, speeding up the operation, and so on. And I think that's probably the trick of the shale oil, despite of the price discussion and the development in the fracking techniques and what have you, but being able to respond. 60,000, I think Dr. Farouk mentioned, operators in the US for shale oil, and probably 60,000 other supporting companies. We are nowhere near that number, but we need to go toward. I don't think we will ever get to 60,000 operating companies, but increasing that number is definitely the trick in my mind.
And you mentioned the ICV as well. This is really important for operators and clearly determines a lot of bid wins as well. I know this has been a big talking point within the industry and certainly within the government as well. When you look at this program and the in-country value program in particular, How do you ensure that these ICV requirements benefit the Sultanate and boost in-country value for Oman, but also at the same time stay fair and competitive for stakeholders who are looking to do business in the country?
It is designed to be fair for everybody. I mean, we're not doing ICV for the sake of it. We have a number of elements that have been designed by the industry to try and measure the in-country value components. We are extremely flexible where ICV doesn't make sense. We definitely don't unnecessarily push for it. But we sincerely believe that in-country value is the direction to go. We currently stand at about, depending on the numbers that you get from the operators, anywhere between 35 to 40% of in-country value total cost kept in the country. We think that is a healthy position to be in. We need to be a little bit more focused in terms of what are the services and equipments and what have you that need to be brought into the country. But in-country value is not a showstopper for operators. I don't think anyone came to me and said, because of your in-country value program, we are unable to operate in Oman or provide services. To the contrary, everyone embraces ICV and they understand that it's fair and they can actually contribute fairly with ICV. It gives them a fair playing level with the local operators. So if you're an international service provider or an operator and you know that by embracing ICV you can actually compete with local industry, local service provider, then that is a very strong and healthy position to be in.
I wanted to ask you about the direct translation that ICV is having into the economy today, but first, I think it's also important if you would like to perhaps provide any insights or any best-in-class process to operators in the room today when it comes to putting together an ICV. What advice could you offer them, and could you give them a message on this process?
Well, the local operators, they know the system very well because they developed it with us, or we developed it with them together. And I think we are also improving that process as we speak. So the local operators, they don't need to be educated in ICV. They actually know it by heart. They're probably educating us on what things we need to do. For the international operators wanting to do business in Oman, and of course the service providers, I think it will be important for them to get in touch with the Ministry of Oil and Gas. We have a dedicated department looking at oil and gas, at ICV, and they will be able to share with them the 7 elements that we use when we measure ICV, and the 5 elements that goes into the contract. Because the 7 elements we use for measuring ICV, but 5 particular ones, they actually go into the contract. And that's how we measure it. The monitoring that we do on a regular basis, and so on, the support that we can offer the service providers and the operators. So the message is really get in touch with the Ministry of Oil and Gas if you're in doubt or you need more information, and they will be more than happy to share the entire process.
But bottom line, Oman, open for business.
It is open for business.
Talk to me about how the ICV is helping the economy to also develop and transform as well, and how does heavy oil play a role in building up Oman?
The whole idea is that, as I mentioned before, is really localizing a lot of the material that the equipment and services that we need for executing our business. Again, as I mentioned, it's about anywhere between 35 to 40%. We started with a very low number a few years back, 15 to 20% in terms of the total spend retained in the country. Today, our monitoring program is indicating anywhere between 40% of the total spend retained in the country. In fact, this afternoon we'll also be after this presentation, we'll also be signing a memorandum of understanding between 4 companies. That is one of the ICV products, is to try and upgrade the turnaround process and mechanism. These are some of the catalysts of ICVs. We look at areas where we think that can be localized, we can improve it better, and together with the support of the operators, we put together a mechanism or a project to try and harness it, and this will only improve over time. If we look at the industry itself, I think a few years back compared to today, we have seen a total growth in terms of the equipments that are produced locally, the quality of the machinery that is available locally, the services that are offered with local companies, not necessarily local only Omani companies, but also international companies localizing the services and so on. And I think that's working quite well so far.